morning, everybody, and welcome to my brand new series called Conversations with Jacob. Today I'm joined by, matter of fact, I'm honored to be joined by David Newell, and who played Mr. McFeely on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and he was also his PR guy. David, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Jacob, and speedy delivery to you.
There you go, yeah. Now, David, which I've seen other interviews on YouTube that you've done, and people always jumped right into Mr. Rogers. But today, I'm going to start from the beginning. And how did you get involved in the theater work?
Well, ever since I can remember, when I was little, I was interested in theater. And as a matter of fact, my grandfather, when I was about 9 years old or 8 years, something around that age, took me to see my first play. And the name of the play was called Harvey. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It was a professional touring company, and Harvey was a very popular play at the time. And the plot was there was a man whose name was Elwood who had a pet 6-foot-tall rabbit, and only he could see it. In other words, he talked to this invisible rabbit. That was the basis of the play. And that was my first play, and it starred Joe E. Brown, who you probably don't know, but he was a very famous comedian of the 30s and 40s, and he was touring in it. And that was my first play. And I remember coming home after the matinee of seeing the play and being enthralled with the whole procedure, not only what was going on stage, but was happening in the house with the lights and the curtain and the sound and the people. It was all very intriguing to me, and that started it. And I got involved in a theater group a little later called the Pittsburgh Playhouse, which was a community theater that did a lot of plays, and they had a school. And I attended the school there for about 3 or 4 years and worked there. And then I went to college at the University of Pittsburgh, and after that, or during that time, I went to, now we're in 1967 now, I went to Europe for the summer to visit my cousin who was living in London. And to make a long story short, I got a telegram from a mutual friend of Fred Rogers and mine saying Fred Rogers is taking this program, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. It was regional at the time, and taking it national. And he gave my name to Fred Rogers to be interviewed for production assistant. And I went to interview him, I didn't interview him. Well, in a way I did, because he kept asking questions, and I'd ask him questions. He didn't ask me anything about myself, or about the job, rather. We just talked for about an hour. And then he offered me the job. He said, "When can you start?" And that's in a nutshell how I got involved in all of this. It took me all those years from seeing that play up until the time I met Fred Rogers, preparing for my entry into television.
All right. Now, my next...
And here we are.
Okay, my next question is, when you first met Fred... what was your impression on him?
Well, I knew who he was. I knew him from television because there was a local version of Mr. Rogers in Pittsburgh. But I had never met him. And my first impression was, boy, when you're talking to him, he is paying attention. He looks right at you. He has all the questions, and he really is with you. You can feel that he has a presence, and out of that comes his mission. I could feel that this man is really serious about what he's doing with television and how he wants to make a program for children that's positive. That was my impression, that his passion and his mission for creating good television for young children. All of that I got from my first meeting.
All right. Now and how did the Mr. McFeely character come about?
Well, that meeting I had with him, he had already written 2 weeks worth of scripts. He wrote his own material. He wrote all of the shows, almost all of them. He had a few helpers, but he did most of them. At any rate, the first ones he wrote, and he talked about my job as a production assistant. That was my main job. Then he said, well, when can you start? And I told him, and he said, oh, by the way, I also have written into the script a role for a delivery man. And I want you to play that role. He didn't audition me. I guess he auditioned me by talking with me for an hour. And that was my audition. And he said, and your name is going to be Mr. McCurdy. Well, here's how that happened. Mr. McCurdy was the president of the Sears Roebuck Foundation, who gave us underwriting money to start the program, and underwrited the program for years and years. And the first day of taping, the phone rang. It was for Fred, and he went in the control room to get the phone. It was Mr. McCurdy calling, saying, we wish you well. Good day and good luck on your first day of taping. And he said, oh, but there's one thing. Please don't call the delivery man Mr. McCurdy. I guess it was too close for them, McCurdy. He gave the money, and so it was a little sensitive maybe on their part. So, well, Fred came back in the studio, and I knew that he was thinking about something. He came right up to me and said, we have to get you another name. And before he finished that sentence, he said, McFeely, that's who you are, Mr. McFeely. I guess the MC in McCurdy and the MC in McFeely. And McFeely's his middle name. I don't know if you knew that or not.
Yeah. It's
a family name. So around this area, the Western Pennsylvania area, there are a lot of McFeelys. It's, I guess, a Scottish-Irish name. I don't know. A lot of the early days of settling Pittsburgh, a lot of Scots and Irish people settled there, and some were the McFeelys. So that's how McFeely came about. But then I went on. Okay, so he gave me the name seconds before we started the first taping. I went on and we did the little scene. I delivered an armadillo. A little armadillo was, and it had something to do with the first script. I can't remember all of the details, but that's what I delivered. And as I was leaving, I said, well, I have to take the armadillo back to the zoo now, Mr. Rogers. And he said, okay, Mr. McFeely. As I was leaving, I turned around to him. I said, speedy delivery. And he said, speedy delivery, Mr. McFeely. And off I went. And that's how McFeely and the catchphrase was born.
All right. Now, and would you was also his PR guy. And how did that come about?
Well, during the time that we were doing the program, these were the early days of television. And we had a small budget. And we didn't have a lavish PR budget, but I did a lot of appearances, too. I'd go to public stations and do a lot of promotion for the program, because each public station ran the program, but some of them didn't run it at a certain time, and it was my job, in a way, to go out and service the customer, so to speak. So as time went by, I moved from being a production assistant on the taping of the program to a public relations person, responding to all the requests coming in and asking publications if they'd like to talk about the neighborhood. So just searching for ways to spread the word about Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. So that's how it came about. So I just sort of transitioned from production into public relations of the program, and I did that. In fact, I'm still doing it in a way by talking with you and other podcasters. It's still public relations in a way.
Now, do you get any PR stories that we may not have heard of?
Oh boy. Let me see. What have you heard?
Not too much.
Well, the PR. Well, I think Fred Rogers. He was not a performer. He was a communicator, but he wasn't an actor, and he felt uncomfortable being in interviews. That was not who he was. But he knew that it was a necessary evil. You have to go out and do public relations to spread the word. And I think one of the first big PR events he did was appearing on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. And I don't know if you remember Johnny Carson, but he was the Tonight Show host. Now, of course, it's
Jimmy Fallon.
Boy, pardon me?
Jimmy Fallon.
Yeah, Jimmy Fallon. That's right. Jimmy Fallon's on The Tonight Show now, right? And at any rate, back then it was Johnny Carson, and Johnny Carson had been doing takeoffs on Mr. Rogers. He used to do these little comedy sketches on Tonight Show, and he would do one about Fred. I mean, every other week it seemed like. So I called the producer and said, "Well, I think we need a little equal time here for Fred to come on and talk about what he's doing." And they invited Fred to come and talk about how serious he was about making good television programs for kids, because I think a lot of people were seeing these parodies and not really understanding how serious Fred was. And I think that was the first breakthrough that people found out through this it was PR really, that let Fred explain his rationale for the program and the age group and what he's doing with television and how he wants to make it a very comfortable learning situation and talk about feelings. And it was all very new at that point because not many people were doing that on television, and I think that's why a lot of people were making parodies of it too, because it was so different. But that probably was the breakthrough of a PR event that I think began the re-examining by adults of this program. It's not just puppets and songs, but there's more to it. There's a depth to this program, talking about feelings for children and talking about different scary things that might scare young children. A lot of people don't realize that a 3- and 4-year-old don't separate fantasy and reality. That's why the program's set up with Neighborhood of Make-Believe. That's the fantasy part. Yeah. But the opening and closing with Mr. Rogers, that's the reality part, and he separates the two for young children. Now, a 10-year-old separates fantasy and reality, but a 3- and 4- or 5-year-old may not. So that was a big facet of the program, too.
All right. Now, going back a little bit, and what did Fred think about people doing parodies of the show?
Eddie Murphy did a famous parody. Remember that?
Yeah.
The Eddie Murphy. And Fred thought it was a affectionate takeoff. He didn't think it was mean-spirited, and I don't think it was either. I think it may have been a little raunchy, but it wasn't mean. And that's what Fred thought. That he thought. So one day, I was doing another PR event, and I had Fred on it was the show with Tom Snyder that was on NBC. It was a talk show, late at night talk show, but they taped it in the daytime about 5. And after the taping was over, the floor manager came to me and said, this is Friday night, and right upstairs in Studio 8H, they're rehearsing Saturday Night Live. You should go up there and surprise Eddie Murphy. Take Fred up and surprise him. So we did. We found the elevator. We got up, and they said, we're on a break. He's in his dressing room. So Fred went over and knocked on the door, and Eddie Murphy opened it up, and I think he really was surprised. And he said, "The real Mr. Robinson." He called it Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, the takeoff. And they gave him a hug. And somebody, I wish I had the picture here to show you, but somebody took a Polaroid picture. Somebody had a Polaroid camera and took a picture of Fred and Eddie. And I think that's the only picture that exists of the two of them together. But Fred thought he was doing it in a very affectionate way, although funny, but affectionate. And that was Fred's take on it. I don't know what other people's takes, but that's how I took it too. I thought that Eddie was being respectful in a very funny way.
Speaking of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and with me being a kid and watching Mr. Rogers, and and how many episodes and did they tape in a day?
Well, we would tape it separately. We would tape all the neighborhood of make believes, where the puppets are.
Yeah.
That would be maybe a 2-week taping. So we would do all of those puppet sequences, maybe about 2 weeks worth of puppet sequences, and then that set would be taken down, and they'd put the interior set up the next couple of weeks, and we would tape the openings and closings, and then the editors would put them together. So I guess if you would break it down into weeks, we probably did, let's see, in a week we would have done about a week's worth of programs in a week, given it was split up between several different weeks. Am I making sense?
Yeah.
That we taped it in segments. And then when we had filmed or location, like visiting a factory or something, that would be done first. We'd have that video. Then he would know how long the neighborhood could last, and then we'd know how long openings and closings could be. So we started sort of from the middle and worked our way from front and back. we taped it from the middle and worked sideways, I guess you could say.
All right. Now, was Fred the kind of guy that if he walked into the studio and if he went to do a scene, would he want it to be perfect, or would he go back and try it again?
He wanted to be as perfect as we could get it. Now, television, there's always glitches. Something happens, and sometimes what would be maddening for him would be that all of the actors would have had everything right, and there may be a technical glitch, like a sound dropout or a picture flashing or something. We'd have to stop and do it again, or go back and do a segment and then edit it. That would make him very frustrated. But he never got frustrated when people would make a mistake. It's when the cameras or the light would burn out or something technical that got him so frustrated that you knew that he was frustrated, because he was a musician and we had a piano in the studio, and when something was bothering him, like we had to wait for a light to be changed or camera to be new tube or whatever, he would go over to the piano and play the piano, and you knew that he was working out his frustrations on the piano. He practiced what he preached, because he always told children, when you have mad feelings, do something that doesn't hurt people. Bounce a ball or pound some clay or some dough or play your toy piano or whatever, but don't hit anybody because you're mad. And he really did that. He went over, sat down at the piano. He could play by ear, so he could play anything he wanted, and played the piano. And you knew he was working out his frustrations about all the technical glitches that were going on.
So did Fred write all the songs on the show?
He wrote most of them. He wrote most of the music. There was in the early days, there was a program called The Children's Corner, which was the forerunner of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and that ran for about 7 years. I wasn't involved in that one, but there was a woman on there who was in front of the camera. Fred only did the puppets on that program, but he wrote a lot of the songs, and his co-host, who was in front of the camera, her name was Josie Carey. She wrote some of the lyrics and songs too, but for the neighborhood, Fred has written most of the songs he uses on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Some he's brought down from the Children's Corner. Some that Josie wrote he uses, but anything that is on the neighborhood, I would say, would be 95% his words and music. And he wrote little children's operas too. We did about 15 little operas, not really real opera, but like little musicals. And he wrote all of the music to those little operas we produced for children, encouraging children to be creative. If you encouraging them to make up their own stories, or make up stories using costumes, or or draw. I guess you could call Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood encouraging creativity, because that's what he did on television for all those many years. And, the program is still being seen. It's on, there's a PBS Kids app you can get for your computer, pbskids.org, I guess, and you can see 400 of the Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood programs, so they're still available.
Yeah.
And so your viewers can know that it's still on, and they can show it to the new crop of children growing up.
There you go. Now, my next question is, and what was the normal day of filming like for the show?
Well, we would start at 9 o'clock. The crew would come and get the camera set up, and they'd test the cameras out and make sure the lights were. That was an hour just to test things. Then at 10 o'clock, the actors were due, and the musicians were due. And what we would do would be walk through the first scene. For instance, we'd take the neighborhood of Make-Believe, and the scene might be 8 or 10 minutes. We would walk through it with the cameras and everything. And the director would be able to set up shots and get what he wants to take. And if there are any line changes or anything, that could be done at that point. It was one rehearsal, and then we tried to get a take. The second walkthrough or run through or taping would be the real thing. And sometimes we would get it on that first time, and we'd be delighted if we did. And sometimes we didn't. Sometimes you had to do it a second or third time. But it was usually rehearse, tape, watch it, see if we liked it. If we didn't, here's what we changed. Go back, tape it again, watch it. If we like it, we take it. If we didn't, one more time, let's do it again, he would say. And Fred we had a monitor in the studio. After we did the take, they played it back in the studio because it was on tape. You could see it immediately. And Fred would sit there and watch it, and very intently watch it, and take little notes mentally and on paper. And he would say, that's fine, let's move on. Or, no, I don't want that line. We should not say that line. Here's what we should say, something like that. And he'd correct it. We'd tape it again. He'd watch it again. If he liked it, we'd take it. If he didn't, one more time. Usually on the average, we got it the first or second time, though. So the average taping day was rehearsal, tape, watch, take it, not take it, tape it again, probably take the second one. And that's how we did it. The whole, how many years? 35, 40 years we did that.
Wow. Let's see, the next question would be, and what was the final day of filming like?
It was bittersweet. Fred felt, I think it was time to wrap up the series. But he had some other things he wanted to do too. The series continued after we finished on that last day of taping. He had other plans to work on other projects, which he started. But that last day was very bittersweet. Everybody we taped in a studio in Pittsburgh, a public television broadcast studio, a big studio, and had 3 floors of offices and other studios. And everybody came down at the very ending of the taping, and we taped that. After we were done with the program taping, we taped a little party that we had on the set, and we have that video. And it was, if Fred's wife came in, and other people's husbands and wives came in, and it was a sad day. I had a hard time in a way, but I was there the next day because I was working. We had other things to do. And the program from that point on, the last day of taping was 2001 or 2002, I can't quite remember. And the program was on the air daily for the next 10 years. So it's like nothing really changed. The program was on and everything, and it's still on the air in many different ways. Some stations show it on weekends, and some have their PBS Kids on computers. So it's still around. And you may have heard there's another program. The follow-up program is called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood. Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah.
And it's on PBS now every day. It's called Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, and that Daniel is sort of in the role of Mr. Rogers. He puts a sweater on and puts sneakers, but it's all animated. And there's a little McFeely in it. There's a McFeely animated, and there's Lady Elaine, and names have changed. It's the second generation of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood of make-believe. And there's a trolley, and some of Mr. Rogers' songs are used. So it is a tribute to what Fred started many years ago.
All right, David, we're getting close to the end of the program. Can you tell us about the Speed Delivery DVD?
Oh, yes, there's a Speedy Delivery DVD that was made, about 8 years ago, and it's really a documentary about my time working on the neighborhood, and they interview my wife and my sons, and we see, Mrs. Rogers is interviewed. It's really just a very gentle tribute to Fred and also to my time on the neighborhood, and it's available. I think you can go online, SpeedyDeliveryMovie.com, SpeedyDeliveryMovie.com, and you can get a copy of it there if anybody wants to. But it's a little tribute to my time on the neighborhood.
Well, David, I want to thank you for coming by the program to talk about Mr. Rogers and, of course, your career. And I hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you very much, Jacob. And I'm going to count to 3, and we're both going to say Speedy Delivery. Here we go.
All right.
1, 2, 3.
And Speed Delivery.
Speedy Delivery. See you, Jacob.
We'll see you, David.